The galaxy had never seen anything like it. The quiet whispers started as soon as the first reports filtered back from the distant world of Salar, a barren rock on the edge of known space. The Vork had arrived to expand their empire, the fierce alien race known for their brutal tactics and overwhelming numbers had conquered countless worlds without mercy. They believed themselves invincible until they met one human sniper standing alone against them. Captain Elias Drake had been sent as part of a small reconnaissance team, a last-minute deployment designed to gather intelligence before the main human forces arrived. But Drake had other plans. His mission was not to report back, but to strike hard and fast before the Vork could gain a foothold on the planet's surface. The first shot rang out from a hidden ridge high above the battlefield, and the Vork general fell without a sound. The battle froze for a moment, and in that instant Drake vanished into the terrain once again, a shadow among shadows. The Vork were used to facing threats head-on. They had never encountered an enemy that didn't rely on overwhelming force. But this was different. The sniper was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Their sensors could detect nothing. Their armies had no way to track him. They only knew one thing: their commander was dead, and they had no idea how or why. Drake had already moved on before they could even begin to comprehend what had happened. His single shot had shifted the entire momentum of the battle, and a sense of unease began to spread through the ranks of the Vork. They began to panic, not from the human army itself, but from the invisible threat that had taken their leader without a trace, and they had no idea how to defend against it. As the hours passed, Drake remained hidden, watching and waiting with unwavering patience. He had studied the Vork, the way an artist studies their canvas, knowing exactly where to strike, knowing how to move without making a sound. The land around him was a perfect ally. The dense forests and jagged cliffs gave him cover, while the distant mountains hid his movements. Even as the Vork commanders began to regroup, they were oblivious to his presence, not even knowing they were being stalked by a human sniper who had no intentions of playing by their rules. Every attempt to regain control of the situation was met with failure as Drake picked them off, one by one, never revealing himself, always moving with the precision of a surgeon, cutting out pieces of the enemy's strength without leaving a trace. The Vork began to send in more forces, trying to search the area and flush out the sniper. They deployed drones and ground patrols in an effort to corner him, but each time they grew closer, the sniper was already gone, and they found only the remains of those who had been too slow to escape. Each attempt was met with more casualties. Their soldiers began to turn on each other as confusion and fear spread like wildfire among the ranks. The Vork realized they were no longer fighting a conventional war. They were in the middle of a nightmare where the enemy could strike from anywhere at any time, and they would never see it coming. Drake's reputation began to grow even as he remained silent. As his presence became more and more of a mystery to the Vork, they realized they weren't just facing a soldier with a rifle. They were facing something far more terrifying: a human who could think faster, move better, and adapt to any situation better than they ever could. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to learn a harsh truth: the most dangerous kind of enemy is one who never plays by the rules. The sniper was something they could not predict, and it terrified them like nothing else. As the hours turned into days, the Vork commanders grew desperate. Their carefully laid plans were crumbling under the weight of a single human sniper whose presence seemed to warp the very nature of the conflict. They had assumed their technology, their superior numbers would win the day, but it seemed as though nothing could account for the unpredictable nature of their human adversary. Every time they tried to establish a foothold, every time they thought they had the sniper cornered, he was already somewhere else, striking at their leadership, dismantling their cohesion piece by piece. In the chaos that followed, Drake continued his silent campaign, picking off the Vork's strongest warriors with surgical precision. The sniper was becoming more than a threat. He was becoming a legend, and it was spreading across the ranks of the Vork like a wildfire. The Vork commanders called in their most elite units, highly trained soldiers equipped with the latest tech designed to hunt down and neutralize the most elusive of enemies. They were known as the Shade Warriors, masters of stealth and infiltration, capable of operating in total darkness and evading even the most advanced sensor arrays. They were feared across the galaxy, and now they were dispatched to find the human sniper to end the nightmare that had haunted the Vork army for days. But Drake wasn't worried. He had already accounted for them before they even arrived. He knew they would come the moment they decided they couldn't afford to lose any more ground, and so he set his traps, carefully laying the groundwork for their inevitable arrival. The Shade Warriors entered the forest with a quiet hum of anticipation, each member of the unit, a shadow among shadows. They moved with unmatched skill, searching for any trace of the sniper, but they were looking for the wrong thing. Drake had already anticipated their every move, and as they advanced deeper into the forest, the trees seemed to shift around them. The terrain itself seemed to play tricks on their eyes. They couldn't tell if they were being followed or if they were being led into a trap. But one by one, they fell without warning. No shot fired, no warning, given only the sound of their bodies hitting the ground as they realized too late they had been outmaneuvered once again by the human who saw things they could not see. The remaining Shade Warriors began to panic. They had been trained to track and kill with cold efficiency, but against a foe like this, there was no certainty, no predictability, only fear. Each one of them began to question whether they were the hunter or the hunted. The forest seemed to close in around them, every rustle of leaves a potential death sentence, and with every fallen warrior, the Vork's strategy grew weaker. Their command structure was disintegrating as quickly as their forces, and in that moment Drake struck again, his rifle echoing through the trees as another Shade Warrior fell without a chance to react. And with that, the last remnants of the Vork's elite unit were wiped out. The sniper was everywhere and nowhere. All at once they had become prey to a force they could never understand and could never fight back against. Drake remained in the shadows as the Vork scrambled to regroup. He knew they would send more troops soon. They had no choice but to escalate, but every new attempt to find him would only lead to more chaos, more confusion, more fear. He wasn't just killing soldiers, he was killing morale with each shot he took. He was eroding the Vork's confidence piece by piece, and they didn't even know how it was happening. But the truth was simple. He wasn't just a sniper, he was a master of psychological warfare, a human force that moved with perfect control and precision, a force the Vork could never outthink or outfight. The news of the human sniper's devastating effectiveness spread quickly across the galaxy, and it wasn't long before the Cinder Empire took notice. The Cinder were an ancient race known for their ruthless pursuit of power and technological superiority. They had crushed countless civilizations with their fleets and advanced weaponry, but they had never faced an enemy like the human sniper. There were whispers in the Cinder War Council that the time had come to test humanity's resolve, to prove that no matter how elusive the human sniper was, no one could stand against the might of their empire. They had seen the destruction on Salor, the chaos, the confusion that followed the sniper's invisible strikes, and they knew they had to act before the myth of the human sniper took on a life of its own. The Cinder sent their best operatives to the front lines, a unit known as the Phantom Hunters, the finest soldiers in the Empire, trained in stealth combat and equipped with cutting-edge cloaking technology. They were known for their ability to infiltrate any enemy position without detection. They were the perfect weapon to counter the human sniper, or so the Cinder believed. They arrived on Salor under the cover of night, their cloaks blending them seamlessly into the environment. They moved silently through the dense jungle, confident in their ability to track and eliminate any threat. They were the ultimate hunters, and this human sniper would be no different. But once again, Drake was prepared. He knew the Cinder would come the moment they decided the Vork were too weak to handle him. He had already studied their tactics, their technology, and their behavior. He knew the Phantom Hunters would try to use their cloaking devices to hide themselves from his gaze. But what they didn't understand was that the human sniper was not reliant on sight alone. He had learned to listen to the subtle sounds of the forest, the way the leaves rustled, the sound of a footstep on soft earth, the tiny disturbances in the air caused by a body moving too fast, too smoothly. He knew how to spot the differences, how to sense the presence of something that didn't belong. For hours, the Cinder moved through the jungle searching for him. They used their technology to track every disturbance in the environment. But Drake was always one step ahead. He watched them move. He knew their positions without needing to see them. And then the first phantom hunter fell a single shot, a whisper of a rifle, and then silence. The others froze for a moment, unsure of what had just happened. They were certain they had seen nothing. There had been no sign, no movement, but one of them was down. Another shot rang out, and another Cinder soldier dropped to the ground. Without a word, the forest echoed with the sound of their breathless gasps. As panic began to spread through the unit, they had been outplayed, outwitted by a human they couldn't even see. The phantom hunters attempted to use their cloaking devices more aggressively, trying to close in on Drake's position. But every move they made was anticipated by the human sniper. Each time they thought they had a chance to strike, they were met with more gunfire, more casualties. Their cloaks were useless against the mind of the sniper, who had been trained not just to kill, but to think several steps ahead. Every time the Cinder tried to regain control of the situation, they only found themselves drawn deeper into the trap. Drake had said he wasn't hunting them, they were hunting themselves, and they didn't even realize it. By the time the last phantom hunter fell, the Cinder had lost not just their elite soldiers, but something far more important, their confidence and their understanding of war. They had been defeated not by superior technology, not by greater numbers, but by the ingenuity and patience of a human who understood something they never could. The real strength of a sniper lay not in the weapon, but in the mind behind it. And now the Cinder knew they were not dealing with a simple soldier. They were facing a force that could not be defeated by brute strength alone. The defeat of the Cinder's phantom hunters sent shockwaves through their empire, and the rest of the galaxy. Word spread faster than the Cinder could contain it. The once unquestioned superiority of their military was suddenly called into question by a single human sniper who had outwitted their finest operatives. The Cinder War Council convened in haste. As the news of their failure reached them, their elite soldiers had been bested by the very tactics they had spent centuries perfecting, and now the Empire had to face a new reality, one that was impossible to ignore. The human sniper was no longer just a nuisance or a ghost. He was a force capable of dismantling even the mightiest armies with precision and patience. In response to the mounting threat, the Cinder turned to their most advanced technological innovations. They were no strangers to the idea of countering unconventional warfare with superior tech, and so they began deploying an array of new tools designed to locate and neutralize human snipers. Their engineers worked around the clock to produce devices capable of detecting the faintest signs of a sniper's position, from thermal readings to motion sensors. The Cinder believed they had cracked the code. If they could just pinpoint the human's location, they could finally put an end to his reign of terror. But as the Cinder began to deploy their new weapons on Salar, Drake was already 3 steps ahead. He had anticipated that the Cinder would rely on their technology to find him, just as they had against the Vork, and so he had already begun adapting his methods to outsmart their latest tools. He understood that a sniper's greatest advantage wasn't always their weapon, it was their ability to remain unseen and unpredictable. No matter how advanced the technology the Cinder threw at him, Drake was determined to remain a shadow in the storm, a presence that could not be detected or anticipated. The first wave of Cinder hunters arrived on Salar, confident that their new equipment would give them the edge they needed. Their sensors began scanning the area, looking for any sign of disturbance in the environment, any trace of the human sniper. But Drake knew the terrain better than they ever could. He had studied every contour of the land, every shift in the weather, every rustle of wind. He understood how to move in ways that didn't create any detectable anomalies. No heat signature, no motion to track. Every movement he made was deliberate and calculated, each step taken with the knowledge that his enemies would be watching for the slightest hint of his position. The Cinder's advanced thermal detectors proved useless in the dense jungle. Drake moved through like water through the cracks of stone. Their motion sensors gave false readings. Every time they thought they had found something, it was already gone. The human sniper was always just out of reach. Their technology might have been the best in the galaxy, but it was built for a type of warfare that didn't account for the creativity of a human mind. And then the real shock came. The Cinder had built their technology with the assumption that they were dealing with a traditional sniper, someone who relied on conventional tactics and weaponry. But Drake wasn't just a sniper, he was a master of psychological warfare. He knew that fear and confusion could be as powerful as a bullet, and so he used the Cinder's reliance on their technology against them. He began planting false signals in the air using simple tools he had on hand, creating distractions and decoys that made it appear as though he was everywhere and nowhere all at once. The Cinder's lines of communication broke down as they tried to decipher the false readings and conflicting data every time they thought they had a lock on his position. The sniper was already gone. They couldn't trust their sensors. They couldn't trust their own eyes. And that was exactly what Drake wanted. By the time they realized they had been outwitted once again, the human sniper had already disappeared into the jungle, leaving nothing behind but chaos and fear. As the Cinder regrouped for a final attempt to corner Drake, they found themselves facing an enemy who had not only bested their technology, but had turned their own tools against them. The fear that had begun to settle into their minds was now a certainty. They couldn't defeat a sniper who thought like this, a human who could see through their technology and use it to break them apart piece by piece. The Cinder Empire had never been defeated by mere tactics before, and the growing frustration among their ranks was palpable as their advanced technologies failed them time and time again. The human sniper on Salar had shattered their illusions of invincibility. With each calculated move he exposed the limitations of their reliance on technology. The Cinder generals had spent decades perfecting their fleets, their weapons, their surveillance systems, but against a single human on the ground they found themselves powerless. They were no longer facing just a soldier, they were facing an enemy who understood not only the art of war, but the mind of the enemy itself. The Cinder War Council gathered once again, this time with a sense of desperation. The usual calm and arrogance had evaporated, replaced with a burning need to reclaim their honor and superiority. They could not allow a human sniper to be the catalyst for the downfall of their empire. The problem was not simply the sniper's ability to outthink them. It was the growing fear that was infecting their troops, the fear of fighting an unseen enemy who could strike at any moment and then vanish into the shadows. They knew that unless they did something drastic, they risked losing more than just Salar. They risked losing their position as the dominant power in the galaxy. In response to this growing threat, the Cinder Empire called upon its secret weapon, a group of elite strategists known as the Dominion Architects. These brilliant tacticians were trained in the most advanced forms of psychological warfare and were tasked with planning campaigns designed to crush even the most formidable enemies, not through sheer force, but through manipulation and control. The Cinder believed that if they could break the human sniper mentally, they could force him to make a mistake, one that would end his reign of terror on Salar, and prove once and for all that no one could stand against the might of the Cinder Empire. The Dominion Architects devised a complex plan to lure Drake out of hiding, to force him into a trap using his own tactics against him. They flooded the jungle with false signals and decoys designed to confuse him. They set up mock camps with fake leaders and scattered their forces in a pattern designed to create the illusion of weakness. They wanted the sniper to think he had won. They wanted him to think he had broken their lines. But what they didn't realize was that Drake had already anticipated their every move. Drake had watched the Cinder carefully. He understood their tactics, and he understood their psychology. He knew that once they realized they couldn't defeat him through conventional means, they would resort to mind games. And so he had already begun planting his own false trails. He had lured them into a web of confusion and doubt, and now he waited, knowing that they would make the first move. The Cinder followed the false leads with increasing confidence. They thought they had outsmarted him. They thought they had figured out the perfect way to trap the human sniper. They were wrong. By the time they realized their mistake, it was already too late. Drake struck swiftly and without mercy, picking off key targets within their ranks and leaving them unsure of where the next shot would come from. Each move they made was anticipated. Every strategy they employed was countered before it could even be fully realized. The psychological pressure was too much for the Cinder to bear. Soon their once dominant forces began to fragment. Soldiers turned on each other. Distrust grew as their carefully laid plans unraveled with each passing hour. The Empire's confidence crumbled. The fear of the unknown had gripped them, and they couldn't escape it. The human sniper had taken everything they believed to be true and turned it against them. In the end, it wasn't the Cinder's technology or their armies that led to their defeat on Salar. It was their failure to understand the most powerful weapon a human could possess: the ability to adapt, to think critically, and to remain calm in the face of overwhelming odds. Drake had not only outsmarted them, he had shattered their sense of certainty, and with that he had won a victory that was far more devastating than any battle could ever be. The Cinder were left broken and humiliated by a single human sniper whose mind was his greatest weapon. The victory on Salar sent ripples across the galaxy, and with each passing day the myth of the human sniper grew stronger. No one could ignore it any longer. The galaxy's most powerful empires, the Cinder, the Vork, and the many others, began to feel the weight of their own fear, not from each other, but from this one elusive threat. It wasn't just the fear of dying at the hands of a human sniper. It was the fear of what that death represented: a simple soldier who could topple entire fleets with nothing more than his rifle and his mind. This fear began to erode the very foundation of their military strategies. For the first time in centuries, the great empires of the galaxy were uncertain of themselves, and the thought of facing a human sniper in battle was enough to send their leaders into frenzies of doubt. A fleet of Vork warships arrived at the fringes of Cinder space, a massive display of power, meant to remind the Cinder of their place in the galaxy. They were the rulers. They had always been the ones who decided the fates of the lesser species. But now there was an unease in their command, ranks of fear that had never been there before. The very idea of taking on humanity had become a risk, a challenge. They were no longer sure they wanted to face the Vork commander. General Alok was a hardened veteran with decades of battle experience, but even he could not shake the thought of human snipers lurking in the shadows. The legend of Drake and his unseen attacks had become a psychological weapon in itself. No fleet was safe when a single sniper could decimate a command structure with one well-placed shot. General Alok convened a council of his top officers on board the flagship, the colossal warship capable of laying waste to entire planets. The room was filled with hushed voices as each officer contributed their thoughts on how to deal with the growing human threat. Some suggested relying on advanced technology to locate the snipers, while others proposed a more brute force approach, sending wave after wave of soldiers to overwhelm the human forces. But it was clear none of their ideas were enough. They had faced alien armies and fought against advanced civilizations, but no one had ever dealt with a human sniper before. The possibility of being taken down by an unseen enemy was a terror unlike any they had faced, and it left them all uneasy. In a separate part of the galaxy, a Cinder warlord named Korath sat in the darkness of his flagship, contemplating the same problem. The fear of human snipers had begun to seep into his mind. As well, his soldiers had learned to fight through countless battles, but now they were questioning their own ability to win battles where a single shot could change the course of an entire war. Korath had grown tired of hearing stories of Drake and other human snipers picking apart his forces from impossible distances. He knew the time had come for something drastic, something that would eliminate the myth of the human sniper once and for all. Korath called upon his most trusted commanders and devised a plan to eliminate the human snipers once and for all. He knew that if the galaxy saw the Cinder Empire fail to crush the human threat, their power would be diminished. He couldn't allow that to happen, so he chose the one tactic no one had ever dared to try before. He would use the fear itself against the humans. He would find a way to make them hunt the hunters, to force the human snipers into the open where their fear of death and failure could be used against them. The plan was set into motion with the deployment of a fleet of Cinder ships to a remote human colony, a place that had been relatively untouched by the galaxy's larger conflicts. The Cinder began to attack in a series of quick raids, hitting small outposts and villages, making sure to leave behind nothing but destruction. Their strategy was clear. They wanted to send a message to the human snipers that the time for hiding was over. They would be forced to face the Cinder on their terms, not from the shadows, not with the safety of distance, but in the open with everything to lose. As the Cinder forces began their campaign against the colony, they waited for the human snipers to strike back. They expected to see the familiar signs of well-placed shots from hidden positions. They expected to hear the reports of soldiers falling dead without warning. But what they didn't expect was the silence. The humans did not come for them. They did not shoot from the shadows. They watched the destruction unfold in front of them. And for the first time, the Cinder saw something they never thought possible: fear in the eyes of their enemies. Not fear of death, but fear of the unknown. The fear that the human sniper might just be waiting for them to make the first move, because in that moment they realized something they had never understood before. The sniper didn't need to fight on anyone's terms, but his own. And if they couldn't find him, if they couldn't get him to act, they would lose the war, not to bullets or bombs, but to something far more terrifying: the sheer uncertainty of fighting an enemy who could never be fully understood. The silence that fell upon the human colony was almost deafening to the Cinder forces. They had expected retaliation. They had anticipated sniper fire at any moment. But the humans didn't play by the rules. They had anticipated something far more dangerous than a few well-aimed shots. They had underestimated the human sniper's greatest weapon: patience. The Cinder had come to believe that their dominance in space and technology would crush any resistance, and for the first time they were questioning their own assumptions. The human sniper wasn't just a threat to their soldiers, he was a threat to their entire strategy. He had turned the rules of war on their head, and now they faced something even more dangerous than the sniper himself: the fear that came with facing an enemy who refused to fight on anyone's terms. General Alok stood on the command deck of the Vork flagship, staring at the tactical readouts that showed the Cinder fleet moving closer to the human colony. The stars outside the viewport seemed to mock him. The Cinder had come in full force, expecting to crush the human resistance in an instant, but the silence was unnerving. They had hit the colony's outer defenses with everything they had, and yet there was no sign of human retaliation. Not a single sniper shot, no ambush, no traps, nothing at all. The Vork soldiers were tense, their eyes scanning the jungle for any hint of movement. But there was nothing. It was as though the humans had given up, or worse, they were simply waiting for something. The tension continued to build, and in the silence, something began to shift within the Cinder leadership. Korath, on his flagship, had grown frustrated with the lack of progress. His forces had been unable to pin down the human snipers, and worse still, the humans weren't attacking as they had expected. Their passive resistance was more unsettling than if they had thrown everything they had into the fight. The Cinder knew that the human sniper was not a soldier fighting a conventional war, but a hunter playing a game of patience and control. And in this moment, the hunter had all the power. On the surface of the human colony, Drake watched as the Cinder fleet hovered ominously in the skies above. Their next move would define everything he had done so far. They were playing a game of brinksmanship, a psychological war where one wrong move could give away his position. But Drake understood something the Cinder didn't. The moment they showed fear, the moment they hesitated, was the moment he won. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of being forced into a corner where he would have to play by their rules. The silence that had fallen over the battlefield wasn't a sign of weakness, but of mastery, a display of control that he had honed for years. The human sniper had become a ghost in the machine, a force they couldn't see and couldn't predict. As days passed without any human retaliation, the Cinder began to feel the weight of their own uncertainty in every briefing, in every transmission. It was as if the entire fleet was frozen in place, unsure of how to proceed. The soldiers couldn't fathom the concept of a war where they couldn't strike back. They had never encountered an enemy that made them hesitate before making a move. The Cinder had always been the aggressors, but now they found themselves at the mercy of a sniper who knew how to make them second-guess every action they took. Then came the unexpected move. Drake did not attack from the shadows as they had expected. From the very heart of their command, the human sniper had turned their own technology against them. He had infiltrated their communications network, using their own systems to flood their tactical displays with false information. The Cinder fleet was no longer able to trust their own sensors. Their data feeds were corrupted by a series of false signals and disinformation designed to create chaos among their ranks. The Cinder couldn't tell who was where or who was the real threat. They were left vulnerable to an enemy they couldn't see or understand. With every passing hour, The Cinder leadership grew more desperate. Their fleets began to fracture as they tried to regroup, but the damage had already been done. Drake had won not by taking the single shot, but by breaking the Cinder's confidence piece by piece without ever revealing his position. He had demonstrated what it meant to fight a war on his terms, not theirs. The Sindar warlords were now facing something far worse than just a sniper. They were facing the reality that the human sniper was not just a physical threat, but a psychological one who could turn their own advantages against them without lifting a finger. They had not only underestimated him, they had underestimated humanity's capacity for war in a way they would never recover from. The final act of the battle for Xalur was not one of overwhelming force or catastrophic explosions. It was a battle of attrition, a test of wills, a conflict that would not be remembered for the destruction it caused, but for the silence and the shadow that hovered over everything. The Cinder Empire had been shaken to its core, but the galaxy had yet to fully comprehend what had transpired on Xalur. The legend of the human sniper had become a symbol of something much greater than a single soldier or even a single battle. It had become a warning, a reminder that no matter how advanced or powerful an empire might be, there would always be something they could not predict, something they could not control. The Cinder's once mighty fleet had been reduced to chaos. Their communication lines severed, their strategies in ruins, and their soldiers scattered like frightened prey in the wake of a hunt they could neither see nor fight back against. Drake's tactics had bled their confidence dry, and when they tried to regroup, they found themselves trapped within a network of misinformation and fear. There was no leader to rally behind, no clear command to follow. Each ship in the fleet was a target. Each movement was watched and anticipated by an unseen force who had already anticipated their every move. As the final remnants of the Cinder fleet withdrew from Xalur, General Alok stood in the command center of his flagship, staring at the screen that displayed the retreating warships of his once proud forces. Every sensor array was showing nothing but empty space. The Cinder had failed to break the human sniper's will, and with every retreating ship the realization settled in that the Cinder were not the unstoppable force they had once thought themselves to be. Their empire had been exposed for what it truly was, a brittle structure that relied on technology and brute strength, but had no answers for something as elusive as the human mind. The Federation of Planets had been watching the battle unfold from a safe distance, and when the Cinder fleet retreated, they recognized the true significance of what had happened. The human sniper had done more than defeat an enemy. He had shifted the balance of power in the galaxy for the first time. The larger empires had seen that their dominance was not a given, and they understood that they could be toppled not by another fleet or another weapon, but by the ingenuity and patience of a single human soldier who refused to follow the rules. On the surface of Xalur, Drake sat silently watching the distant stars. The conflict had ended, but the consequences were far-reaching. The human sniper's legacy was no longer just about the destruction of the Cinder fleet. It was about something far more profound. It was about the human spirit that refused to be bent by overwhelming force or fear. It was about the unyielding will to survive and adapt in the face of impossible odds. Drake knew that the war for Xalur was just one chapter in a larger story. The galaxy had been forever changed by the actions of a single human soldier, but it would take more than just a sniper to secure humanity's place in the galaxy. No longer would they be seen as mere pawns or lesser beings to be conquered. No, now humanity had earned the respect of the most powerful empires in the galaxy because they had proven something simple and irrefutable, that the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy was not the strongest army or the most advanced technology, it was the human mind. As the dust settled over Xalur, the galaxy would never forget the lessons of that quiet battle, fought not in the roar of battle, but in the calm and calculated silence of a human sniper who had changed everything and had shown the universe that no empire, no matter how mighty, was safe from the one thing they could never defeat: the human will to fight.